Yes, Karishma.
Yeah.
Yes, okay. Thank you. All right. Okay, yeah. Vinita is just joining. Great. Thank you, Chandana, for acknowledging you could see my screen. Yeah. Really good to see all our colleagues joining back in. Okay, it's 4 p.m. I will get started. Vinita will join us slowly. We operate at, we work on India Bioscience time, which is starting right on the dot. So welcome everybody. Good afternoon. So good to see you all. And so good to see you coming back 4th month in a row for our 4th huddle. So we're sort of little less than halfway through our huddles, and I think we must be doing something right, but it's too early to say. I hope this one is also exciting and informative. So welcome all. And as our colleagues filter in, we'll just get started with some introductions. So why I Huddle is a webinar series. It's a webinar, but we really make it a meeting format. So you can have your audios on and videos on, and you can raise your hand to ask a question anytime during the session. The idea of not having it as a webinar in terms of the setup and having it as a meeting is so that we can engage more closely. And we really wanted to keep conversations with young investigators and early career researchers in India going on throughout the year, not just at our young investigator meetings and regional meetings, which are coming up. Starting with Lucknow and Srinagar, and they're going to roll out in that order. So I'm just slipping it in here. You can take a look at our website for more details. Registration is still open. But the idea of these meetings is to just come together and talk about things that are relevant to doing science as an early career researcher in India. We've had some very interesting sessions in the previous 3 huddles. This one promises to be no different. So I will introduce the interlocutor for the session, who will introduce our guests. So welcome, Tapasya. Really good to have you.
Thanks, Karishma.
And as Tapasya and I discussed before the meeting started, a lot of Twitter interactions, but the first time we are on the same virtual platform.
Absolutely.
Live. So yes, that says a lot about Indian science Twitter and how it gives you the feeling that we know each other. All right. So thanks for doing this, Tapasya. Tapasya is a professor at Delhi University, and she works in cancer biology broadly, but she also teaches a range of courses from molecular biology to some specific courses in cancer biology. So a lot of experience right there, Tapasya, with publishing, with producing data to publish, with getting through the publication process. And I'm sure you're going to draw on all that experience. So with that, I'll say stay engaged with India Bioscience, and we'll tell you about the next huddle at the end of the session. But now Tapasya will introduce our guest, Moumita, and our second guest, Vinita, who I believe should be joining soon. But you can get started, Tapasya.
Sure. Thanks a lot, Karishma, and I'm very happy to be here. And I'm absolutely delighted to introduce our guests for the day and the panelists for the day. So I'll start with Dr. Moumita Koley, who is associated with the DST Center for Policy Research at the Indian Institute of Science. And, her interest is in finding ways to make science open and accessible. So this is really relevant to today's topic that has been, put up by India Bioscience. And especially she works on open data and open data policies and how it can be extended to open resources. So I think we'll get some wonderful insights from her. I'm really looking forward to hearing you, Moumita. And Dr. Vinita Gowda, who I don't know if she's joined in, but maybe I can just leave her introduction to later, Karishma, if that's okay.
Sounds good, Tapasya. Sounds good. Vinita said she's joining in. She's just getting in, so she should be here anytime. Yeah.
All right. So, let me just start with this, Moumita. One thing is that we are obviously going to be discussing about different academic publishing models which are available. And it would be really nice for a number of young investigators who maybe would have joined in for the first time to get sort of like an overview on what all publishing models are available. And then if you could move on to telling a little bit about your thoughts on those models. So over to you, Moumita.
Yeah, thank you, Tapasya and Karishma, both of you. I mean, it's nice to interact because I think this is what we were missing, and especially also a little bit of the interdisciplinarity, because maybe we always talk about between just our immediate peers in the same field and then miss out a lot. Yeah, so thank you again. Just thinking about it, the different publishing model, I mean, again, it's probably suddenly become that we have to talk about different models, because a couple of years back, it was not the case. We knew that it's just subscription. You just know that how you know your journals, you just send it. If you're lucky, you get it published. No worries on giving more money, trying to think about if I have a project, if that project funds my publishing cost, because it used to be very small amount as in when we in the subscription model. So right now, what we are seeing, and I think that's even much more pronounced in the biological sciences, is that at least 50% of the journals have become open access. Now, what do we mean by that open access? So that means that they are no more subscription based. So of course, anyone can access the content from that particular journal. But for that, now you have to pay. It's you. I mean, the researcher has to pay. Of course, it's expected that the project will cover it, but that's not always the case. And that is not a very small amount. On an average, this is for a standard good journal where we want to publish, it is around $2,000. So now let us do the maths, how much it comes to INR. Maybe our like almost 10-15% of our project budget, it would just go to publishing one. So of course, that's becoming a huge problem in terms of we had 100 journals, now we are reduced to 50, because the rest 50 you have to really think of how you gonna pay to publish in the journal. Now the next is problem that is there is another model. So it's like subscription plus hybrid. So the journals is still basically subscription, but someone who has the ability to pay would be able to make it open access. Now, okay, on the onset, it's probably is not a big problem because you still can publish. But then if you think of it, you're someone publishing in the same field, if it is open access, it will have a lot more citation, no doubt about it.
Right.
So again, you are in a problematic situation where you are disadvantaged just because you come from a country where you don't have the support to pay the article processing charge, APC, in a hybrid journal. So these are the two real problem and challenges that we see. Down the line in the conversation, we will explore much more, because there are more nuances to this whole problem. Okay. And since I think Vinita joined, so I better that you introduce her and then we take on the conversation.
Sorry,
That's right.
sorry, people. Yeah, I had a last minute emergency. Sorry about that.
Okay, so we have Dr. Vinita Gowda here. So welcome, Vinita. And Vinita is an associate professor at IISER Bhopal. And her research interests are plant evolution and ecology. Isn't that right, Vinita?
Yes, that is right.
And particularly, you use phylogenetic tools to study different traits. And you even move across taxa and you study about pollinators also. So very interesting work indeed, Vinita. And of course, here we are talking about the outcome of all of that work that you do. So we were at that first question and just taking thoughts on, these current academic publishing models which are available to researchers. And what do you think about them, and how do you think, publishing in these, are there choices to be made? How can this possibly be done?
Right. Thank you very much for being accommodative about my late entry. And so, yeah, it's a very tough, I mean, I heard someone interestingly give a talk today where the scientist sort of repeatedly said, if you don't publish well, you may not be a good enough scientist. If you don't publish And publish well is a important quote unquote term, and not just publish. And that, you have to publish to flourish. If you don't publish, you'll perish. And it's all I agree with all of that, because it's like in the business model, right? Why would you set up a company if you can't sell the product? So think of the scientists that way. So I agree that we are that industry in some sense. So if I do science, I have to publish. I'm with that thought. And also communication and all that is important. But then when we start assigning this quality, right, then it again becomes between, do I want a Louis Vuitton bag or do I buy a bag from the roadside? They both do exactly the same thing. The status symbol is different, but clearly I will not buy a Louis Vuitton because I can't afford it. Does that make my homemade, handmade, mom-made bag any less better, or any or less important and less, precious for me? So that's where I think we need to start looking at science as that commodity. I think we need to sort of start looking at it as a trivial thing, and because we've associated so much intellectual thought process to it, so people conveniently drag it into this quality when you say Nature Science paper, and they conveniently say, no, but I'll do it in my society journal. So right now we are in a phase where I feel money is important. We're already in economic sort of downturn in general. The idea of science and the science I do should not be affected by the money I have. And the money that I earn from grants or wherever should go into my research, should go into what my students and I are interested in exploring. And if I have to do it spend money in talking about what we already explored, I find it quite, bizarre. And how we reach this model and why we're even discussing this thing is very strange, very, very strange. So in my case, I have to say I'm reasonably lucky than most, only because in basic, like in classical botany, and now classical botany doesn't mean we're just going to give names to it. It's not taxonomy. It is still molecular work. We still do genomic. We also do genomics work, genomic and population genetics, everything. But the interesting thing is, because my field is a field, conservation biology has a lot of money, but botany, in a sense, in the simplest sense, does not have a lot of money. So our journals, most of my journals are still society journals. So all it requires for me is a society subscription, which, of course, what we have done in some of the larger societies is some of us have become council members, have more voice in the societies, and we have reduced the cost of the membership for our students. So now membership cost for students is $25, for instance, right? And you get a 1 year this thing. And so when my students are submitting, I don't have to pay any extra charge. As it is, the publications are free. So there is no APC in some sense, and we usually just donate money from the grant. So usually I'm giving a lot of service to these societies. My students give a lot of service to the society. And by service, we mean that when there are conferences, we'll help them out in doing workshops, etc., etc. It's mostly like science services in some sense. So therefore, most of the societies have carefully, consciously avoided going to some of these big money-making publishers. And they're literally, and when I say this, they're literally protecting, some of us as council members, we're literally protecting the journal from going into a big journal, a big publisher, so that we don't have to pay. Now, of course, the downside of it is that when you submit a paper, our portals will not look fantastic. Our portals are not, fancy, because we're not paying that money, So you'll have authors sort of saying like, well, I submitted and, nothing has happened. Yeah, because it's like, because I'm working on the back end and I'm not a computer scientist, and I'm not a technical person who'll solve, way to route it fast. But this is one of the solutions that we are sticking by, is stick with the old thing, because it helps us get publications from developing countries, which is where my, new species are being discovered there. It's not being discovered on the streets of New York, for that matter. So we want papers from Indonesia. We want papers from Malaysia. So we're making effort. But that effort is a monthly, yearly fight.
Yeah.
Every year when these societies meet, we discuss, should we go to, some of these XYZ big publishers? This will really scale our journals up, right?
Yeah.
Our rankings will go up, our
Vinita,
factors will go up.
Sorry, interrupt, but are these open access?
Yes, most of them are also open access. Yes. So
Cool.
that is what the society journal brings in, is when you go to the society, you're paying a society membership fee, you get a community, and you get open access. But again, this is not, I mean, in some sense, the most what is trending feels like cancer biology or immunology, where, like it matters that I get in the paper by tomorrow morning, so these are slightly laid back fields in some sense. There is of course competition, but it's not time sensitive in the real sense, right? So I have to say some of us have managed, but to keep the society journals alive. But otherwise, I completely agree with what Moumita said, that it's very, very difficult. And deciding that $1,000, whom am I going to give to?
Yeah.
Which student? If I have 8 students, whose paper gets that $1,000? And clearly it's going to bring in bad blood within the lab as well. It's a very tough and unfortunate and not fair thing for people or the scientific community to do to each other. It's just not. And so clearly everything ends up being about money and not about the quality of science. And so and like I said, if we go around giving talks where we say publications are very, very important and your quality of publication is important, then let's talk about what do you mean by quality? Yeah. Is that quality by any chance decided by the amount of money you paid? Or is it decided by a society? Or is it decided by your community? And either way, everything is debatable, right? Because even societies, there can be an argument that, the society now acts as a mafia, and they're not going to allow everyone's papers to come through. So there's a pros and cons for everything. Yeah. But money by far, which is the way it is right now, and the lack of access. So let's say, in fact, the most biggest joke recently has been people writing these papers in Nature and Science about not having no access to science, and that paper is behind a paywall.
Yeah, absolutely. I think that's something that, we're also talking about. And you mentioned about how it's such a problem having all of these paywalls and subscribing, maybe having access to reading, but then you don't have the publishing option open for you. So, just coming back to you, Moumita, on this, what do you think about the journals which are coming from India, like the Indian journals, which some of them may be associated with societies, as Vinita would have mentioned, but then there are many others, maybe not a very high impact factor. Strengthening those if they can be open access. Do you have any thoughts on that?
Yeah, thanks, Tapasya, for this nice question. But before answering that, since I would take a little liberty to go back to why we came to this, a bit much more back in the history, because just now as Vinita was mentioning that the money bag, the society, how or when we actually moved from this society to this money bag problem, because probably as a scientist, we need to know that, how it came to here. So I would just touch upon that history a bit, because that would give maybe a bit more thought, maybe some more thoughts for us to go on. So you have to go back really a lot, 50, 75 years. After the World War II, when it was, the science became much more institutionalized, because in US, they had come up with science policies after the World War, and then the institutionalization of science, how government runs science, all this has started. So, and then onwards, actually, a lot of money flowed into scientific enterprises in the institution. And a lot of let's say, new papers and all started to come up. Now, before that, everything was run by societies. Before that, there was no concept of Springer nature or this or that. So one gentleman who realized that there's a huge business opportunities in 1950s, and he started something called, I think it's called Pergamon Press. And his name is Robert Maxwell. And he commercialized the whole thing, the enterprise of publishing. Before that, if this gentleman would not have understood that there's a huge potential of the commercialization, we would not come to this stage. But then slowly what happens is that everybody realized that there's a huge potential to have money making, and then it flooded in. And slowly, except for a few societies, we all, even like our Indian society is also given their journal to run to the Springer. I mean, of course, it's a bit different So we don't still have to pay at least for publishing, but then still it's not an ideal model. So if we see that we have handed over all our freedom to publishers, and not just that, we handed over the quality also to be decided by them. Because from where does this impact factor came, quote unquote? Impact factor also came from a very different, it came from library science. And it was decided, the impact factor thing, based on citation and lot, a calculation for the libraries to help which journal they should subscribe. So that means in their institution, which journal people are reading more, which journal they are citing more, and they cannot, let's say, subscribe to all journals. So they would cherry pick the one that is important for the institution. The library would do it like that way. But what happened is that, again, we now took this impact factor, which was purpose was completely different, to measure the quality of our science. So with all this, the question would boils down to it that we are doing all the work. I'm reviewing 5 papers as in 5 months, and a lot of work for that, and I'm giving it for free. And then why should I hand over everything to the commercial publishers to decide? Why we cannot take back what was ours? And if you see, in this 2023, at least there was 4 to 5 cases. One, I think it's in biology, in one journal of Elsevier, Neuroimage, the whole editorial board resigned over this issue of open access, high publishing charge, and they started one journal with MIT Press. And it's not the first case. In this year, there was another 4 of those. Very prominent journal with commercial publisher, one from Telefrancis, one for Wiley, 2 from Elsevier. So all the cases, the editorial boards are resigning. So it means that the scientists, we all are now waking up to the fact that things are getting wrong. So this is where that we have to take a call here. We have to come to us, or we all have to decide that let's do something different. So this is what is now coming to your question, Tapasya. If we want to make that what we should do something different, then we really have to ask ourselves, or also do this, that let's not decide what is published in Nature or Science is the best. We know science is incremental. We will do something a little bit more, and that's good enough, or that's fine enough with our resources, with our whatever. And we should not think that it has to go to Nature or Science. We should be happy because the community can decide if it is not a fake science, if it is a good science and it was useful to train students, why should not that be a good science? It might not be path-breaking, but it still is a good science. No, and this is how we can actually support each other.
Yeah, that's a wonderful point. And before we move to a question that has been posted, which is a really nice one, I just want to make a small comment that, publishing is very competitive. It's a $25 billion market. And the smaller publishers, as well as the ones that Vinita mentioned and Moumita mentioned, people are trying to keep float. Ultimately, it comes down to our own community, and our community, which is, evaluating publications and trying to look for alternate models, or as you suggest, it doesn't have to be the biggest ones. It can be any of the, but somebody on the other end has to be sitting there and saying, look, it's fine that you have published this. This is good quality work and we appreciate it. We think that, yes, something like this can be promoted. So, it's like there's a lot of cohesion is required between different people, which sometimes seems lacking. So before going into a little more of that, let's take this question about preprints. And Shalini has asked that whether it's safe to go for preprints, and does it risk our science being scooped? So I'd first go to Vinita, if you could take up this question, and then I'll come to Moumita.
Yeah, this is a very, very good question. Strangely, someone asked me this yesterday and I answered this exact same question. So I have a ready answer for this. And it is that in my field, preprints is not a great idea. And so bioarchive works well when my paper only has graphs and tables. If my paper has a lot of metadata and I have to put an appendix to it, where that metadata can now be taken by someone, stitch it with other metadata that they've been collecting for the world, then for an ecologist, let's say I'm working in a forest in northeast of India and Western Ghats, I have all these characteristics which is there, and I'm using that for the paper. We usually put all these data in the appendix. If I go for the preprint for that, I can bet you before I submit my paper, that data will be in someone else's data, and it'll be a nature and science paper, because some of the data points that's missing in ecology and evolution is from countries like India, Indonesia, Malaysia, because it's not easy to work here. So preprints is not a solution for me. And in fact, someone told me saying, well, if you have all this data, why aren't you putting it on bioarchive? You could have at least cited it. And I said, no, because there's this huge risk. How are you going to guarantee that this data is not going to go into something else? And for us being in India, once it has been scooped into something bigger, there is no point of reanalyzing and submitting that data. So there's a huge risk for me. So I will not put it in bioarchive. So it will sit in my desktop forever. Yes, it will not see the light of the day, but whatever. But at the same time, that's not a solution for us. So in my case, in my lab, I have made it very clear that if we are putting something in bioarchive, it is something that is non-scoopable, and interestingly, a lot of idea in some of the journals is also that they do tell you that, have you submitted, and is this manuscript in any form on bioarchive? And if you say yes, in the next step, they actually do not consider you for review. So the editor kind of looks at it, judges it, and then the decision is kind of made that it may not be actually accepted. So even at an editorial level, there may be a bias. In fact, some journals outrightly say that it's already on bioarchive, so now we are not going to consider it. So there's also an internal bias from journals. So one has to be very careful. So in my case, when I submit it on bioarchive or any of these preprint sort of locations, I usually am very, very careful of making sure that it's not scooped, it is not scoopable, and there are no risks involved in all the associated papers that is there with the paper that I'm putting out. The only places where I've recommended sort of preprints to be published online and open access and all that is when the authors, all of them agree that putting it out there is much more beneficial than keeping it on your desktop, and it's a service that you're sort of providing. So, but yeah, one has to be ready for not being acknowledged and not being given the due credit.
Yeah,
and that's a huge risk.
Absolutely, it's a risk, and that's the practical, reality that decision making, and everybody faces that. And as you mentioned rightly, like it's a very diverse group, of people working, and what preprints mean to one may not actually be the same for the other.
So actually, sorry to interrupt, but I think Raghavaraman said
there's a question there.
Yeah. So I think, you're right about that there is a protection, but that protection doesn't work when you can take the data and you just needed information to say whether the character was present or not in a certain location. So you can, if you needed confirmation, that can come from a preprint, and that's usually sufficient in my field, for instance. So it is not foolproof really. Yeah, so one has to be very careful. Is all the thing is. It's not the DOI is not going to protect you too much. That fight is also not worth it. I've been through one, and it'll take 2 years of your time to go through editorial system. It's not worth it. Yeah.
So Moumita, your thoughts on preprints and this kind of an accessibility, and where are young scientists going to be placed in this decision making?
So I think it's completely depend on also the discipline. So for example, as Vinita mentioned, so the data sitting in her desktop is much better than because anyone will scoop it and all. But that's not the case for most of the field, because most of the field anyway, when you publish your paper, they ask you to give your data I mean, of course, you do a supplementary information file where you provide most of the data that needed to reproduce your results. And right now, in many of the fields, now it's becoming more and more common that you put your data out in a data repository as well, which will also give you a DOI, especially some of the raw data, because that's for the openness sake, for the reproducibility sake. If it is there already on the open domain, the raw data as well, so people can reproduce. There would not be question of all this the science is facing right now. Many of the, especially again, in some of the biological science field, the image manipulation, you would, if there is this retraction watch, and retraction watch catches up that so much of image manipulation happens. So that's why it's important that the data is raw data is out there in those data repositories. But then again, it is very field specific. Most of the field, this could be okay, because once you have published, first of all, preprint, and you have the timestamp with the DOI. But again, it's very important to understand that it won't help, like in case Vinita's case, because people would use the Indian data and publish, and they would publish in Nature. Ours would not get that. So that's a very different, let's say, a disciplinary behavior. But in many other disciplines, it's not the case. So preprint gives you the timestamp, and then people cannot really scoop your thing, because again, if you put the associated data with the preprint in a data repository, there also get a DOI. So more or less, it's fine to do it, but again, I will re-emphasize on the fact that it's a disciplinary norm, because as Vinita was mentioning, that some in how field journals won't accept, but there are, like for example, take theoretical physics or computational biology, where people puts in archive, which has been practiced in for archive started in early 2000, if I'm not wrong. Then it becomes such a common norm, you won't scoop. Or even if you scoop, people would say, okay, this was already there in archive, and there's a, you can go through the dates. So it's not possible to scoop. So again, it's very discipline specific. And I think most of the discipline is going in a direction that preprint is getting accepted. And data, and for example, in Europe, now the open data policies are more, and also NIH, NSF in US, they are mandating open data. So that means that they're expecting that the researchers would put their data in the open domain, in the data repositories. So considering all this, I think that's the future probably, but each field will go in a different momentum, and a bit disciplinary diversity will still be the case.
I can just come in the middle, only thing is that preprints, if they're lying as preprints for very long, what happens is that neither do you actually end up getting citations. So it's a very tricky thing. You will not be cited. Your work will be picked up and taken ahead by other people, in the middle. So that's, I mean, I'm just talking about, like you mentioned, that there are different domains, and this is something that you observe, that preprints are not really going to be cited, but they're not peer reviewed. So at the end of the day, people keep thinking of it like whether it's being published or not. But having said that, if it has worked in some fields for a really long time, as Moumita mentioned, then what that means is maybe it's a transition for the other one. And maybe we are moving towards, a better outcome to this whole thing eventually, even for other fields, like you mentioned, for the computational biology.
I'm also coming in, sorry, because nobody would put in a preprint. I mean, if you really want to publish, then you won't keep it in preprint for ages. So you will. I mean, what happens is that maybe you get rejected from one journal, then goes to another journal, which is a reality. Then it seems like it's there in preprint for ages, but still you would hold that you were the first one to do it. Only thing is that, I mean, if just to put something out in preprint and then it's not a very good work, it's like publishing it anywhere. We like publish and perish thing has came up, and then we are publishing too much.
Right.
I mean, we are salami slicing it like anything.
Yeah.
So there are many problems. Yeah, sorry,
helping
Vinita,
everybody
please.
make
Yeah,
big
but
bucks.
yeah, but I agree, I think. And I think also the other issue why there is this field specific thing also is probably with how it's a combination of the field and the countries where this kind of research comes from, right? So biodiversity research, for instance, is in the tropics. It is, we are very slow that way because of economics, politics, you name it, right? And while if you look at biotechnology, molecular computational thing, that's on your desktop. So that's considered what we call the global north projects, right? And somehow they're on the equal field when they're competing. But when it comes to biodiversity, a single data point, like let's say if I saw one new snake species from one small spot in Meghalaya, I want to get it out. It will take me forever to do the molecular work, blah, 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 everything. That information cannot get out of me and my desktop. If it does, it's just like a snapshot. Someone will send $1,000 to someone in that village, get the tissue out. It'll be in the US, sequence, done. And it has taken me 20 years of training to stand there and say, I think this is a new snake species, you know? So that time lag that we have where an Indian researcher will take few months to first put it in the jar, then find someone who will sequence it for them, and then you sequence it, then you look at the data. And it's like simple Sanger sequencing. It takes 5 minutes in the US, it can take 5 months in India, right? So that's where that space of science, when it's different, in different countries and you're competing for the same thing, which is called a publication, that's where I think also this preprints become an issue. But let's say if you're comparing a European scientist who's working in the tropics and an American scientist working in the tropics, there is no comparison because their pace is the same. Both of them are working in the tropics, but their labs are fully equipped to handle it. While me as an Indian scientist working in the tropics and American scientist working in the tropics, very, very different because the publication speed is very different. You know,
so Vinita, what do you think about the open peer review system then, you know, as preprint is one option and then there is this open peer review. Your thoughts on that maybe?
Open peer review, I mean, I don't know. I've had mixed thoughts about it just because I do think that it's kind of nice to see comments. But I do also feel, again, most of the time, I'm strangely worried about genuine reviews and genuine comments when it comes to these kind. I don't think this field has still matured where we're actually looking for genuine comments. In fact, what has happened is that a few of the papers that we've actually put out there, turns out many people have read it, but they've not reviewed it, but they've used the information from our work into running an experiment that, you know, they developed independently. But what we proposed in our paper was very important, and they've not cited our work as well. How did I know about it? Because it's one of the rare studies. And of course, they mentioned it eventually saying, oh, we saw your paper. And I said, then you should have cited it, even if it was, you know, you should have said personal communication, said anything. So I don't know. I'm starting to get skeptical that open access.
Okay, looks like we lost Vinita there. And maybe Moumita, you could just pick up for a while till she joins back on what you think about this open peer review.
So the point again, what boils down to is that why we are doing this peer review for journals, and why we are not doing it in the open peer review platform, because there is no incentive as per se, because we want to get associated with us to a journal. But then, but overall, if you see, there are fields which are fighting to take over the control on the researcher side. Let's say in some social science field, and even in some, let's say in the physics also, there's a lot of discussion, a little bit, of course, not on the experimental side. So in the open peer review format, that's what, at least if I would give this example at this, as long as Vinita is not coming back. So I think many of us has, like a month back, there was this report on arXiv. It's called LK99, a superconductor in room temperature superconductor. I think it was becoming really viral that we are now going to get a room temperature superconductor. And it was on arXiv, and then there was a huge amount of peer review. People was trying to reproduce that results and everything. And Twitter, of course, was being flooded with comments that if it is true or not, but then there were constructive peer review. And then all this work has proved right now, it's very clear that it is not a room temperature superconductor. It's a very complex physics there, why they thought, and it's not about a fraud or anything. It's just about an experimental design and all this way it is. So we see the success that community coming together can do something. But now the question is that people will do it for this kind of breakthrough science. When it comes to a little bit of this very repetitive incremental science that we do in our everyday, it's not something people would be interested to go and peer review if there is a nudge from somewhere. So either we have to really think of a model or push from funding agency, push from government bodies, that these kind of model where you put it in preprint and then also community peer review, open peer review comes in, and this would also be considered as a publication because it's got peer reviewed, then it will go on. That is happening already in Europe. And because they had their, this called Quora, so assessment reforms. So of course, sooner or later, they are going to go towards those kind of ways. We don't know how it will unfold. Of course, we cannot think of it. But since it's going in the right direction, all this probably we will see the reality in down the line 3-4 years. But at this point, it is in a limbo because we don't know what the future is. Some field it can be more, transition can be faster, some it can be slower. Yeah, Vinita, you please continue.
So I think in the general sense, something my internet went off. So I think the simple thing is this, that I mean, I think we want to worry about is, there are two, I mean, I think we've discussed, we've probably thought about it separately as well, is the reason we are worried about all of it is because our institutions are expecting us to publish in a certain place, right? So we're being judged. So it's all about that the peer review, in the sense that we also want to be recognized in our fields, right? That's what is driving this whole thing. Yeah. And that recognition comes from getting a job, to getting a promotion, getting a grant, everything about me as a scientist has a number attached to it. Yeah. And that's where we're running into this economic problem. And and one of the things that I think we have to get rid of it. Take a student, we do an interview, you at the end of the day, you have to put a value or some numbers on it. So I think we'll have to face this one way or the other, that we're not going to run away from any metric. There is going to be a metric. That metric is going to be judged by many people. And the only thing I feel that we can do is that we can make sure that that group of people who are judging me for my metric is diverse enough and understands where I'm coming from with my science. Yeah, that's great. So that is my only sort of concern. So I personally feel that no matter what metric you use, what method you use, at the end it is going to get corrupted. So the only thing we can do is make sure that the receivers are or the people who are publishing, or the people who are working towards what we say, improving the science, are getting the due benefit for the seriousness that they've put in that work, right? And there's always going to be, in fact, it's very likely that 60% of the work in scientific journals is absolutely not repeatable, not good, not of good quality. It has gotten because my friend is there in the editorial board, and my friend is there in the in the society. The review process is rigged. You name it. It's already there. The same thing is going to, I have a feeling, is going to come in the peer review. I mean, of any open access papers as well, that your network is finally going to decide whether you're worth it or not. So I kind of feel that, it is like a very difficult spot to be in. We want to be measured because that is the way we recognize each other, and that's the only way we understand, is because there's no real deliverables all the time in science, right? Like, let's say they said, like in industry, that you have to deliver a product which works and it sells, then it's very clear. Even that is based on some selling number, right? We don't have that in science, and we don't want that in science. So therefore, we want to keep it open, but we cannot, because at the end of the day, someone will have to say, what is that score of Vinita, or what is the score of Moumita?
Yeah,
It's just
some kind of parameter would come in.
yes, yes.
And at the end of the day, we also have to realize that most of the funding that we get is coming from the government. So, somewhere or the other, some assessments and accountability have to be in place.
Yeah.
It cannot just be that, okay, we don't have the industry component coming in at all. I mean, I know that nobody is really pitching in, and maybe with this new NRF, with they are hoping to rope in some people. I don't know what the outcome. That's another discussion altogether. But at this moment, because you're using the taxpayers' money, so everything would have to have some parameter of some accountability, some judgment, or something. And that matrix we cannot escape. And that's an excellent point. So I'll just take a question that has come up by Chandana on why do funding bodies not support a category of publication fees? And talking about India Alliance, the thing is, they do. It's not like there is no support at all. They do support, and maybe the amount now it's about maybe if the fee is 9,000, then should they support that? If it's 2,000, should they? What about 500 and so on? So you do get some support, and I also know institutions have devised some way or the other of giving some additional support. And this question is, why do we have to compromise on quality there? So, Moumita, do you want to take this question up maybe first?
Sure. Thanks, Tapasya. My question actually would be, because we have limited funding.
Yeah.
Now, if with that limited funding, whatever we call, do we want to spend on the science that we are doing, or do we want to give it to 2,000 even, like $500 also to go for a publishing a company where most of the work was actually done again by us, associate editorial, the most critical thing, the peer review was done by us for free. Now, do we really want to really keep on going with this model and expect the funding agencies will give us more money? I mean, I'm not saying that there is a solution available at this point, but this is a question that we have to ask ourselves. This question has been asked by people all over the world. People are fighting. As I was giving that example that in 2023, how many editorial board has resigned? Now, if the people outside are fighting, outside I mean to say that scientific community, many people started to do this fight. What we should do, what we could expect, or what we want to do is also up to us. We can keep on going with the model, keep on thinking that, okay, now let's, from the subscription, let us give this money to the publishers and keep going, but it's gonna go up and up. It happened with the subscription. It was not that, but then publishing companies have started to do something big deal. So let's say in your field, there are 5 Elsevier journal was important, but they force you to take 10 because as a bundle. There was a problem with libraries. Why this library started to kind of protest about this scientific publishing is because they were facing the burn. They had to negotiate. They was realizing that how bad they were playing. So considering all this, that we have to understand that this is keep on going to go. So we really have to come together as a community and maybe put pressure on them some way or other. Fine. I mean, we need the service. It's not that we have something easy available. Some field, like in Vinita's field, the society is doing the best job at this point. There is no point to go to commercial, I believe. But then where there is many publications, we cannot handle it. Society was no. But then we have to, as a community, the publishers as their association, they work together. They push their agenda on ourselves, that there is STEM publishing. So why the scientists cannot work together to come to a compromising solution for both of the side of
this? And just one small point before I move to Vinita is like so India is no longer really coming under the LMIC, and it's been taken off from most of these journals, and so which means those automatic waivers are not going to come to us. So now it has to be on a case, maybe some journals do it on a case-to-case basis. I know one institution which has signed up something, but that I don't know whether it's actually for publishing or only for subscription. But, you know, in general, people don't do it. Institutions don't do it, and institutions don't sign up. We don't have an Indian representation in any of these. So the onus would eventually, even if we are moving towards all these journals moving towards an open access and, okay, you know, moving away from these transformative ones, which are going to publish less and less of the subscription and more of open access, we are going to be faced with the thing of not having enough funds and yet having to somehow, you know, skip all of these journals. Eventually, if they move towards the open access, then where do you go? So while we are in the system, the fight has to be within the system. I mean, I think it's very unfair to ask the young scientists to say, okay, you know, you have to be up in arms. The reality is you cannot be. And actually, maybe the start can be from very senior people, you know, and one of the things I mentioned is how about strengthening the Indian journals and, you know, coming up with something, putting some of your good papers in Indian journals, which are, you know, free of cost, and promoting them and making sure that we come up. So that was one thought. And then I, you know, Vinita, if you could just continue for the same thing and, you know, take this forward.
Yeah, I think I completely agree with you about taking responsibility for these kind of problems. I think these responsibilities should be with the senior scientists, not the young ones. I just think that's just so unfair. And luckily, I'm sort of in that sandwich position where I'm a mid-career person, so I'm neither senior nor young. So I can say this boldly now. But I do agree, and I think in some sense, I don't know about this Indian journal bit, because that again becomes a regional issue. Then, you know, that, you know, tomorrow China will say Chinese journal. So I don't think in science we want to keep that kind of a barrier. But I do think that it would be nice if the Global South people came together and came up with journal ideas together. And, you know, so that it's meant, and you, I think, at least in my field, again, tropical biology, we've been trying to push for this, is initiate consortiums in the South, and then we invite the North, and not the other way around. Yeah. Why? Because most of us have by now trained, and we know what our problems are. It is an open system in terms of information going everywhere. Sure. So we have been pushing for this recognition where we say, fine, it may not be as cutting edge science as yours because we have our constraints, but there is no way you can tell our science is bad, or the quality is bad, or it is not a place where we can start new initiatives from. And this has been a long debate. It has not been recent. We've been talking about it in societies. And I think I completely agree that one way to do is become members of societies and convince the boards, convince those consortiums that you have in your subject to see where the next visibility needs to be coming from. So in our case, for instance, I agree, India does not economically come into this sector, but we have argued that majority of our students are still in small colleges and in universities, and we have this funding issue, which is very localized to India. Or even to Asia, and some other countries also have it, or actually South America also has it. It's not just localized to India. It's actually, it's a developing country, underdeveloped country problem. So we are talking about it in that sense, and we've convinced, and all we have to do is some of these journals, we often tell it to students in conferences, we announce it and say, you know, this is the fees, but, you know, you can drop in an email and say you want a discount and we'll give it to you. And so we try to say it sort of, you know, unofficially, and you do get emails where, you know, from students and faculty saying, can you please give me 20% discount? And we do give it. And that's because we want to promote. And that word of mouth has actually spread, because we can't put it online, because of course the society also needs money. But I think there are ways where you can make things more visible and give more power to people to get their papers in already established journals, and that will give them the force to do what you're saying, that is, start your own journal, start your own thing. Yeah. But at this point, I think reinventing the wheel in the sense of forming a new journal is exactly where all the predatory journals also came up with. Yeah. Right. So I don't know how different that is going to be. And it's a lot of work to set up a journal and to keep the entire editorial board, you know, in action. So unless someone is really invested in it, I wouldn't recommend it. But definitely, I also feel we have enough good journals. We are already recognizing those names. Why not change those editorial
Yeah,
boards?
I guess that's what I meant. Yeah, that's right.
Yeah. So I'm kind of more into like, I don't want to start something that's already been done a million times, and I don't want to risk that journal then becoming predatory, because I'm a scientist at the end of the day. I'm not a manager for journals. So I think one has to pick and choose where you want to invest your time.
Yeah, time and mind space is precious. We seem to be like falling short of it, doing everything, about
and reviewing is reviewing is an unpaid job that we're all doing anyways. Editorial thing is also an unpaid job in many cases. So we can't be taking too much and not be paid for it. So
I guess that's what I meant by Indian journals. You have some journals which are already established, many of them associated with some societies or the other. They are there on Web of Science. I speak more of the medical biology and kind of like, at least many of them are already there. So, strengthening those could be one way forward, wherein that groundwork has already been done. It's been incremental. It's been painstaking, but they are there. And so maybe that's one way of doing it. And again, who takes it up? And at some point of time, I had also said that maybe some of these funding agencies should actually take it up, but I don't know whether that's, the correct way. I believe somebody made a similar observation on the chat box. So that's there. And okay, so maybe I can just take one more. Let me just take a question here on is the right. I think the predatory journal is something that you have addressed already, Vinita, so that's fine. And I go on to a question by Raghuthaman Yanamali, who's talking about how we can convince decision makers to not look at impact factor as a metric for quality science. And is talking about DBT as a DORA signatory, but having some it's some requirements there. So maybe Moumita, can you like comment on this? Yeah.
Sure. Because we had done a project with DORA, funded by DORA, and was trying to understand how the Indian science ecosystem, the scientists, everybody looks into it. And the point is that, to be honest, it's not just on the funding agency, because funding agencies were open to discuss these issues. But here the decisions are taken by the senior people. In the funding agency, there are the committee, and then they do the peer review. They decide what is a good proposal, and they decide looking into the CV of a PI. Even the institution, they make their own way of evaluating. Yeah. So everybody, it's not, again, as I mentioned, that the senior people here probably would be the one to take up the responsibility to look it differently. And considering that globally things have been discussed right now a lot as the DORA came up, because again, if that is a good practice, then why should not we adopt it here? And then again, since the senior people or even maybe the mid-career who are on the board, peer review board, or who are reviewing, they should take a call that how they want to. If goes out that, okay, we are looking into the quality of your paper, it's not where you have published, then the impact factor is going to be redundant in not today, but in down the line 2 to 3 years, because everybody would know, nobody is looking at that where it is published, what is that number. Everybody is just looking at your paper, what you have done, how much effort you have given to it. And it doesn't have to be cutting edge, as Vinita was mentioning, because we have limited resources. But we are competing then again within our country. So it should be fine not to look into those numbers. So that would be my, let's say, I would think that if it goes that way, that would be the best.
Yeah, I have to say, I think besides the fact that we all want to publish because we want to be heard out, we want our science to have a face. I think one of the other issue is also that, again, it's obviously banks on almost philosophy, but I think it's better if senior scientists and also in general, all of us, except for the young scientists. The only reason I'm keeping the young scientists away from this section is because I think I think as a young faculty, you're so busy just setting up your identity and the lab. So I think it's a lot of pressure to then expect philosophy from them. So I just feel like, let's just have them establish their science, establish their motto for the students, their lab and whatever. So that's the only reason I'm keeping them away from this discussion. So therefore, anyone other than the young early career faculties or researchers, I do feel that we need to have more discussions on what are we calling good science. Yes, it's a very difficult topic because even in my field, I don't know where I would call it as a good paper. But in some sense, I do know certain labs that the minute they publish, I will read that paper because I know the quality is there. And from those labs, interestingly, it doesn't matter where they publish it. I'll just look for the name of the author, not the journal. So that's the metric that we want to establish, that people should be looking for Vinita Gowda and not Nature and Science and then find my paper, right? Because the quality is me. And any paper where my name is attached is where that quality is going to come from. So I think that is something that I think most of us should talk about and say that the quality should be judged by the people involved, right? And not the journal where I have published. And what I have noticed is that at least some of the big people that I follow in my science, they've published in a spectrum of journals. So their smaller data they've published in a very small journal. The really more sexy data they've gone to Nature. Then they have something else in PNS, and it's all over. So they're not the people who will have back-to-back, PNS, Nature Science papers. And that just allows me to think that it's okay to publish anywhere. The minute they know who you are, what the quality is, it will be recognized. And in some sense, when we are hiring students or faculties, new faculties, I think it takes people who are knowledgeable about the subject to say that, no, this topic is actually quite good. Even if it's published in a small place, it's very good. And oftentimes what happens is that assessment is not there in the committee itself, which is why, again, they're going back into a metric of, but they have a Nature. And if you read the Nature paper, most of the committee members still don't understand it. But they're blindly going to believe, but it's in Nature. So, it's still good because someone said that it's good. And clearly they at least had a money. So maybe he or she is coming from a big lab or whatever. So the metric is really screwed. So I think from the hiring itself, if some of us can speak up when that's happening, I think that's a good start to bring out change. That is, hire people who are not just Nature Science cell people. There's no disrespect to these publications. These are very hard-earned publications themselves. I mean, I would love to have it myself, but no sort of sour grapes there. But I do also feel that when you set up that bar and you're not following up that bar after the person is hired, then I think it's not going to help you. That metric doesn't help. So I think it has to be this kind of recognition of what is the role of impact factor when you're hiring a person? Where is that person now pressured to publish? All of these features will help in reducing this pressure that we have of publishing in these very expensive papers. And the funny part is that almost everyone, I haven't met a single person to date who has not criticized the publishing costs or who is okay with the publishing costs. And yet they do publish there. So I think we have to decide what you want to do. You want to criticize it and yet be part of the system, or you want to criticize it and step away from it. I think these are or do something constructive about it. Like I said, become members of societies or editorial board, write to editorial board. The recent sort of resignations from the editorial board is a very, very important move. But I think it also worked because it was initiated from people who were in the global north, who were already big people. They already were big in their field, and when they resigned, I think it got more visibility there. And people who were new members in the editorial board got more strength to say, well, I am on only the editorial board on only one of these journals. Now I have to resign, but it's okay because, it's a community that is speaking up. So that kind of a support system is required for us to send a message to the journals and voice our sort of, distrust in the sort of impact factor that they're pushing on us. Yeah, and also the whole scheme, it's just not okay. So
it's
someone has to
not
speak
okay.
up. Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, in fact, one of the things, like I said, the lack of cohesion. We are told to collaborate, and we are told so collaboration and collaborating projects are something you are encouraging, interdisciplinary science, a lot of these things. But if you actually look at the promotions and you look at the marks that
Yeah.
are given in, they will slash your marks if you have a collaborating PI. So
Yeah.
you get 0.7 or something, some matrix and some changes. So the whole thing sort of doesn't add up, and somebody really needs to sit and see that everything is in place, and what we are saying we are executing, and what we are executing we are evaluating correctly in line. So maybe we could get some more cohesion there. So I think we're going to, the timekeeper has told me to wrap up, so we're going to wrap up. And maybe I'll just ask Moumita, like, where does she look, like, where this academic publishing is heading in the next, coming decade or so? What do you think?
Yeah, so before going to that, Tapasya, I just, again, as Vinita was telling, that we really has to, as a community, push hard. So I would say, like, for example, we were pushing hard to DST, ACRB, everyone that changed this collaborative that you have mentioned. We really are pushing them. We really are going to them and telling them that this is a problem. This is where your metric has this problem. So in a way that I hope that, and it's not that they're not listening. I'm not sure how much they're going to work on it, but at least they are listening, they're acknowledging.
Yeah.
So that gives me the future that since I am also works with the International Science Council, and we there with the scientific publishing, we're again pushing for the change. So hopefully down the line, at least we won't have to face this huge cost of APC, because there would be some, at least some, not concession, but there's a huge dialogue that many countries, the researchers cannot pay. So at least we probably would have a little more equitable system, but maybe a much better system, because technology, AI, everything is coming up, and that pushing that publishing has to change its way. But the big hurdle here that we're seeing, that the publishing companies are pushing back. They're pushing back hard. So the success or a better future really depends on us as a scientist, researchers, everyone, that how we can come together as a community and come to a ground where all of us is more or less in an equitable situation.
Yeah.
So
Nothing gets compromised, like the quality is not compromised, and yet we are able to do the kind of science that we wish to do without being pushed, and feel that we are being pushed, and then act accordingly. Yeah, that's a wonderful point. And Vinita, you have any thoughts on this?
Yeah, I have something. I don't know. It's kind of really different. It's more of a feeling. Is that I just hope that this sort of personal admiration that we have for these big journals, which I did as a grad student. As an undergrad, I mean, Nature and Cell was science was everything. I used to have the covers on my desk and all that. Luckily, that admiration has gone down, and I think I see it as a good thing. And I hope that goes down even more. That is our self-obsessive sort of admiration for a name of the journal and not of the faculty, not of the person, not of the scientist, not of what they have done, not of the field. And I'm hoping that that's where the next decade is that we are going to stop looking at journals. We're going to start looking at people and places, and see the science behind it. And so in some sense, all of these scandals that we're seeing of retractions from these big journals, that's actually good for us, because that just brings them down from the pedestal that we've put them on, right? And we were expecting them, you're laughing, but that we created this monster, right? So it's like the effigy is now broken down. Sure. And we should realize that, again, it may be, I'm sure, some so a mathematician will draw a curve and say this is expected. And so I kind of feel like that's where we should be. And it's perfectly fine, because that's where we are at science anyways, that we are at that accountability stage, right? So I should be accountable for my research coming out of my group. My students should be accountable for their quality and not whether I've published it in Nature or Science. And I'm hoping that the next decade goes there, and it's coming, and we're getting there because most of us are frustrated. So, and because most of us are not happy with these APCs, and we are fighting this internally and finally demanding for what is rightfully ours. That is, irrespective of where I do the science from, the science should be acknowledged, not where the journal is going from, and not where it came from as well. Whether it came from India, China, or other places, it shouldn't matter to the editorial system when they review.
And Vinita, now you have young scientists coming in, and we are not just, hiring is not just happening in the most well-endowed institutions. It's happening everywhere. There's state universities, smaller colleges, private colleges. So everybody, people shouldn't feel like, they've been left behind. The point is that you do good quality work, and you be proud of that work. You publish it as best as you can, and you take that forward. And great if you have the opportunities to bring in good publications. Good luck for that too, and good luck for those who can't. I mean, at the end of the day, that's what it is. So I think with this sort of like a positive thing, that you shouldn't feel like that publishing in smaller journals and good quality data is any lesser than aiming for some of these bigger journals is a very important takeaway that both of you have sort of elucidated in very nice ways, in different ways. So with that,
some very interesting analogies as well. Tapasya, Moumita, and Vinita. We are going to take them forward on social media.
Okay. All right. Thank you much. Over to you, Karishma, and to wrap it up, or shall we just call it?
I mean, it's really informal and conversational. Thank you all. And thank you all for staying an extra 10 minutes, Tapasya, our panelists, and the participants as well. This is a long discussion, and we're going to keep coming back to it at India Bioscience, because one thing we want to do is push for such hard and tough conversations. Obviously, we don't find solutions overnight. One webinar is not going to change the face of academic publishing, but it's a DY by DX kind of progress towards a better place. So thank you very much. I must say thank you, Tapasya. Thank you, Vinita and Moumita. Thank you very much for giving us your time. And our participants, our next huddle is next month, end of next month, and go to our website. And it's an interesting topic. It's about why IIS should have a digital footprint. And guess what? The interlocutor is Manu Awasthi. So I'm expecting some memes. And the guest is Jen Heemstra from University of Washington, St. Louis. So it promises to be another blockbuster. We hope to see you there. All right.
Thank you, everybody.
Thank you all.
Thank you. Thanks.
Bye.
Have a very good weekend and take care. Thank you, Tapasya, Moumita, Vinita. Thank you. Bye-bye. Thank you, Team India Bioscience.
Bye-bye.
Take care. Have a good weekend. Bye-bye.